learning how to be in control of your nervous system instead of your nervous system being in control of you when you want it that way is an important skill. I want to talk a little bit about how to have better control of your nervous system instead of your nervous system having control of you. Now, that is not to say that our nervous systems don't come in awfully handy sometimes when there is a threat that we need to address. The problem, though, is that quite often we end up perceiving threat where there actually isn't one. And we end up not perceiving what is actually in front of us so that we can respond to it calmly, lovingly, in a way that would support us, but instead we end up being reactive and defending ourselves in some form when perhaps it's not necessary. And the cost to us ends up being the cost is that we end up not living the life that we want. We live a life that is reactive, where we end up not feeling close to the people around us, like the people in our lives, and we also don't end up living a life filled with calm centeredness, where we feel like we are, we have a sense of control about how we respond to things. It's instead we're out of control. We are getting angry more often than we want, or hurt more often than we want. So learning to control your nervous system responses, it's not even control them. Controlling them is actually what gets us into trouble in the first place. We think, I'm just going to override how I'm feeling right now. What we really need to do instead is to learn to give our nervous system what it has been thirsty for, and to give the part of us that developed that nervous system response in the first place what it has been wanting, so that it actually doesn't, so that we can heal that part, so that that is not coming up anymore. It becomes, our response to it becomes less and less, and the amount of anxiety that has to be provoked in us, the size of the trigger has to be a lot bigger in order for us to be reactive. So ultimately we're reactive a lot less, which is so nice. So step one. Step one is getting to know is to start to get to know yourself. Start to cultivate an inner witness. Eckhart Tolle talks about it as the observer. Like, can you learn to be able to watch yourself? I kind of call it the Jane Goodall effect. Like, can we meet ourselves curiously, as if, here's Melanie in her natural habitat, and oh, isn't that interesting? Look what she does when her husband does this, she does this. When her neighbor does this, she does this. Start to notice what you do with curiosity instead of just quickly doing the reactive thing that you ordinarily do, so that you don't even notice what's going on for you. You just jump to action really quickly. So step one, is learn to be a witness. Step two is start to identify, while you're witnessing, start to identify what it is you usually do so that you don't feel the upset as much. Like, what do you do specifically to strategize around not actually feeling some of the hurt and the upset that is going on underneath. And we are great at being logical. We are great at blaming other people. We are great at numbing out to Netflix, alcohol, shopping excessively. There are so many things that we do. Blame others. In order to not actually notice what our experience is underneath those behaviors that are actually being driven by something else underneath. So start to notice some of those behaviors. The next thing is to learn to identify what are the feelings underneath what you normally do. So if you weren't busy blaming somebody else, if you weren't busy, eating another half the pint of ice cream, if you weren't busy blaming your husband for something, if you weren't busy trying to micromanage your wife so that she didn't get upset, if you weren't busy trying to control everything around you, what would you actually be feeling? And then notice what goes on underneath. Anytime that you're not sure, I think it's always a great practice during the day to just kind of stop and take stock. How am I actually feeling? What is going on for me in the middle of what I'm doing? Learning to be more tuned in to our inner experience starts to give us a lot more information in terms of what is driving us, what actually makes us tick. And finally, start to change your relationship to your upset, to your hurt feelings, to your upset feelings. We all too often try and manage them, and we try and push them away, suppress them, not experience them. And generally what my experience is that it means that they actually get louder. It becomes increasingly more difficult to manage them, which is why all of a sudden we find ourselves blowing up at, with the very slightest of provocations. Because we've just been managing our feelings, and very much like a pressure cooker effect. There's only so much we can hold it together before the pressure builds enough that we can't hold it together anymore and it blows. So start to notice what you're actually feeling underneath, and instead of doing what you normally do, don't judge it. Just accept that it's there, and offer it some of the love and understanding that you would offer a small child who was feeling the same hurt, upset, angry feelings. Be the enlightened parent that you didn't have, the parent that knew that all you really needed in those moments was for somebody to just see and hear and understand you. So can you start to be that for yourself? Because my guess generally is that people who were dismissed when they were children, when they were upset, tend to dismiss themselves, because that's what they learned. That feeling is deserving of. That's how you handle that feeling. If you were told not to cry, most people have either a really, really hard time letting themselves come to tears, or they will have a really excessive amount of upset and tears because it's just too much to manage, and keep managing like they were told to do when they were little. So any of the rules that we were taught, whether they were explicit or implicit when we were growing up, Those are the rules that start to question, start to think, what do I allow myself to do? What do I not allow myself to do? Is the rule reasonable? It might not be reasonable. So start to question all of these things. And then learn to meet that hurt, upset self with loving kindness, with love and acceptance. Learn to tend to that part of yourself so that that part can get what it needs, that being seen and heard and understood, being loved and accepted, that is all that we actually need to be able to start to shift that part of us, to start to change how we relate to that wounded part of ourselves and help it continue its developmental trajectory so that it's not wounded and it's not in a state of arrested development anymore. For more on that, you can check out my video on tending. Learn a bit about how you tend to that part of yourself to help shift that so that eventually you can change how you relate to it, and you can allow that part to catch up to the developmental growth of the rest of you and not be ruled by it so much. It is possible to do it. It does take a bit of time. It is the shifting of a relationship with yourself. Starting to shift and create the kind of relationship for yourself that you have always needed. Being that for yourself. So that you don't have to try and get it in the rest of the world. You can learn how to give that to yourself